afternoon to everybody, and thank you for being here with us today. I'd like to welcome all of you to this talk, GST and You, brought to you by the Penang Institute in KL. And before we proceed, I'd like to ask your cooperation to switch off all your mobile phones and any sound-emitting devices. Thank you. And so, as we begin, good afternoon to Professor Datuk Wu Wing Tai, the Executive Director of the Penang Institute, Yang Muhammad Zairil Kirjohari, CEO of Penang Institute, Your Excellencies, Members of Parliament, Members of State Assemblies, and honoured guests. So my name is Sharon, and I'm representing the Penang Institute, and I'll be your MC for today. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Ong Kian Ming, who is a Member of Parliament for Sedang, to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm not a person who likes formalities very much. Maybe I'm in the wrong occupation. I'd like to welcome everyone here, many of you whom I consider friends and future friends. I'd like to thank Penang Institute for organizing this very important event, even as the budget tabling of the 2014 budget approaches on the 25th of October. The GST is clearly a very, very important issue which needs to be addressed, which will have an impact on the lives of everyone in this country. And I'm so glad that so many of you are here today. It shows a high level of interest in something which, perhaps today many of you would feel that this is something which may veer towards a much more academic discussion. I hope that we can make it real to all of you here today, and for those of you who are in the media, that it can be translated into something which is accessible to everyone, to your reader, to let them know that this is an important issue that would affect their lives, and that there are different implications involved when implementing or discussing the different ways in which the GST will be implemented. I'm very honored to be moderating today's session, to have our main speaker, Dr. Lim Kim-Hwa, who has done a lot of work on this issue, and he will be presenting his main findings to you today, which I'm sure all of you will find very, very enlightening and very, very insightful. Dr. Lim is a fellow at the Penang Institute, and he is also a fellow in finance and financial reporting at the University of Cambridge. He has 8 years of experience in the financial sector and was an assistant professor in Cambridge before he decided to come back and reverse a little bit of the brain drain that is plaguing our country. He holds a PhD in finance from Cambridge, and he is a qualified chartered accountant with ICAEW. I understand from Dr. Lim that he was also in Cambridge the same time as our panelist, Mr. Chi-Chang, whom I'll be introducing later as well. Together with Dr. Lim, there will be 3 panelists who would be discussing the insights and also bringing up issues which perhaps Dr. Lim may not have covered in his presentation. The 3, Professor Dr. Wu Wing Tai, who is also the Executive Director at Penang Institute. He is a man who wears many hats, and he is sitting right there near the projector. He is a professor of economics at the University of California in Davis, and at the same time he also travels to Fudan University, where he lectures there, and in Beijing, where he lectures at the Central University of Finance and Economics. At the same time, he is also the director of the East Asia program at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. I understand that he has managed to somehow invite Professor Jeffrey Sachs to come to Malaysia for a special session tomorrow at Sunway University, which I'm sure Dr. Wu will talk about later on as well. And he's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. After Dr. Wu, we have Mr. Chi-Chang, Executive Director for the Research for Social Advancement, or REFSA. He is, for those of you who are interested in budgetary affairs, you may have read his book called The Budget, How the Government is Spending Our Money, as well as Amnonomics, The Dark Side of the Budget, which he wrote together with Johnny, who is a very entertaining cartoonist. He has changed hats from being the executive director of REFSA, which he still wears, to something that is more grassroots oriented. He was recently appointed as a PJ Municipal Councillor So for those of you who stay in Damansara Jaya and PJ, if you have any problems with your garbage collection, you can go and look for him after this. He holds a BSc degree from the University of Warwick and also has an MBA from the University of Cambridge. Our last panelist, who's not yet here today, he's on his way. I just called him. He is none other than Mr. Azrul Azwa Ahmad Tajuddin. He is the Executive Director at the Institute Rakyat. Some of you may know him more prominently as the person who was the former economist at Bank Islam, but was unceremoniously removed from his position because he had predicted a possibility of a Pakatan Rakyat victory at the presentation he made in Singapore. He helped prepare Pakatan's shadow budget in 2013, and he is one of the key people in presenting Pakatan Rakyat's alternative budget or the shadow budget for 2014. So if you want to see what policies the Barisan Nasional may try to copy from us in the future, he would be the person to talk to. He graduated from the Université de Lyons in France with a BSc in economics as well as a master's in finance. So I'm not going to ask the speakers to come up and the panelists to come up on stage first because Dr. Lim will be presenting his slides, and it will be much easier for us to view his slides sitting as part of the audience rather than sitting up here where we will, our view will be impeded. So I'm going to ask Dr. Lim to come up to present his slides and also to make his arguments based on his paper. And I'm going to ask the panelists to come up only later. I will come up and introduce, I will come up to invite them to come and speak after Dr. Lim has given his presentation. And only when everybody has given their presentations will I ask everyone to come up here so that we can have a invigorating Q&A session with your participation. So without much ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Lim to come up to shower us with his many findings from the GST paper he's done. Thank you.
Thank you, YB. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, welcome everyone to GST&U. Today, I want to bring to your attention one of the papers that we are now working on, which is called Implementing Goods and Services Tax in Malaysia. And this paper is being co-authored with my co-author, Wee Pei Chi, who is also with us. And the paper can be downloaded from our website, penanginstitute.org, GST. So you came here with a reason. So let me tell you what are the key things to bring away with. The first thing is that, do we think that GST is going to be likely in this budget? Our findings is that it's very likely, it's 99%. So if it's 99%, what's the impact on the households? From our analysis, we find that the average household is going to pay 2.93% of their income on GST, and that's equivalent to 104 ringgit per month. And if this is the impact on the household, what's the impact on the poor? And if you want to note down, these are the key numbers that you should remember. The high-income households, those that make on average over 30,000, is going to pay about 1.56% of the income. The lower-income households is going to make the lower income is going to make 605 ringgit on average, but it's going to be paying a lot higher than the high-income group, 2.62, but this is still less than what the middle income is going to pay. Those that are making about 2,500 ringgit per month is going to be paying over 3%. So from here, you can see how regressive the tax is. Regressive meaning that the poor will be paying a higher percentage of the income on GST compared to the higher income groups. So this is a very important finding, which is the poor is going to be hit most. The second bit is that how much is it going to raise? From households, we believe it's going to be about 7.5 billion, and that's under perfect conditions. How much inflation will it generate? It's going to be about an additional 3.86% of 3.86% of the CPI in addition. And of course, that's just one aspect of it. The other aspect is that because people have less money to spend, the domestic economy will be affected for that reasons. So these are part of the reasons, but how likely is it in our budget this year? There's 7 good reasons. The first one is, of course, this is going to be the first budget after the elections. So if you want to raise taxes, raise it in the first one. By the time you get to the next election, people will have forgotten about it. Second one is that Malaysia's fiscal deficit has been fiscal position has been in deficit since '98. So it's not an issue of economic cycle, it's structural. So it needs the money. So raising tax is an important element of it to fix the fiscal deficit. Third point is the government has high debt. The sovereign debt, the country debt, is over 500 billion ringgit, and household debt is also high, over 80% of the GDP. With such high debt level, it is important that you have to keep the interest rates low. Otherwise, you will not be able to service your debt properly. But the problem of a bigger scale, or the external factor, is that in the US, since the 2008 financial crisis, interest rates have been kept very low. And how low is it? On average, these days, about 2.6%, but the historical average has been over 4%. Over a 10-year period, it has been over 4.7%. So there is a room when interest rates go up, that interest might go far higher than the current 2.6%. And of course, because foreigners hold 126 billion Malaysian government debt, Malaysia is vulnerable. If you have 500 billion debt and foreigners hold over 100 billion, it is a force to be reckoned with. And of course, because the fiscal condition has been so bad, credit rating agencies have been warning. Fitch ratings has cut the outlook, and that's usually a precursor to the actual downgrade. And Moody's have actually downgraded it as well, warned as well. So with these are important. And in response to the cut of outlook, the government has come out very strongly saying that, oh, we are going to broaden the tax base. So you have to keep up your words, and hence, to be credible, you have to follow up with concrete actions. So for that reasons, for these 7 reasons, we believe GST is going to come. And foreigners holding Malaysian debt, the government has said that foreigners hold certain percent, but predominantly is domestically financed. But as we can see from here, the effect of foreign holders is actually quite strong. First of all, let's see how it has grown over the years. You started from 2000 and from 9 billion ringgit and has grown to 126 billion ringgit as of July 2013. And if you notice this dip, this is when the US government started to hint that it's going to start tapering the quantitative easing, i.e. low interest rate environment. So when foreigners withdraw or sell off from the government debt, what's the impact? It's going to increase the borrowing rate, the interest rate. And this is a zoom up. This is a zoom up effect of the 10 years interest rate of the Malaysian government bond. It has increased by about 0.5%. So if we have 500 billion ringgit, and if interest rates increase by 1%, we're going to start having 5 more billion of interest payments. And this is significant because the current deficit is already at around 40 billion ringgit. So if the fiscal conditions deteriorate further, then for sure, credit rating is going to be cut, foreigners is going to start withdrawing money, interest rate is going to go up, and we get to a situation where slower economic growth might come in, and we get to a vicious circle whereby we might lose control of it. But of course, overhanging all these is the effect of interest rates being increased in the US, coming to an end and being increased in the US. So it is important because otherwise we get to a bang moment where people lose confidence of Malaysia and interest rates increase. So what is the impact? If we think that GST is going to come in because of all these reasons, what is the impact? We use the latest household income survey, and this covers about 25,000 house living quarters in Malaysia. And if the government has hinted of 0% on essential items. So these essential items like basic food, healthcare, education, these would be having 0 rate or exempt. And if we have 7% as the standard GST rate on the other items, the basic normal items, your clothes, your furniture, etc., and we start looking at how households spend their money across whether it's food, whether it's clothes, whether it's furniture, whether it's transport, etc., then we come to an average that the average household will spend 4.41% of their expenditure on GST, and that's equivalent to about 2.93% of their income. And that's 104 ringgit per month. I've sort of categorized GST, the categories of expenditure into 4 groups. On the top one is those there's no GST, the education, the healthcare. Then because of certain items in food, you have GST. The average becomes more than 1%. Likewise, because public transport is not included in GST, so transport on average comes to about 6% plus, and everything else is 7%. So when you start adding up, depending on how you actually spend the money across the 4 groups of expenses, then that would determine how much you will actually pay. So with this is the second item which I want to highlight to you. The average household pays 2.93%, but of course, not everyone is the same. So you will be paying higher GST if you are low and middle income, if you are in young households, if you are a single person, and if you are in a Bumiputra-led household. And if you are engaged in clerical services type of work, fishermen and farmers. And of course, if you stay in Peninsular Malaysia. So these are the second key message that I want to put across. The different segments of Malaysia, of Malaysian households that will be hit by GST. But how do we actually calculate how much GST are you going to be paying? So of course, we use this variable called GSTI, which is basically how much GST you're going to pay as a % of how much income you make. So GST divided by your income. What is important, or what is something that we put forward, is that as income increases, the expenses that household pay increase, but not at the same magnitude. So meaning that as people get richer, they don't spend everything that they have made, the additional amount. So as a result, you get a concave function between income and expenditure. And if we use the estimates from Bank Negara, the red line is when every ringgit that you make as income, you spend it. So it's a 45 degrees line, ratio of 1 to 1. But as people earn more, they actually do not spend as much. So this concave function is important because this would lead us to understand why GST is actually a regressive tax. That as long as you are making more money, you do not spend as much as you additionally make. So your GST burden is actually less. So low and middle income groups get hit. The next graph is a very important graph, and I want to go through it slightly slower. There's quite a lot of information here. The blue line represents the GST burden. So it's the GST as a percent of your total income. And the green bars actually represent the income that you make. And the red bars are the expenses. So as you can see, first thing is that the higher income groups make substantially a lot more compared to your lower income groups. So you'll see that on the left-hand side of it, for the higher income groups, if you look at the arrow on the right-hand side, you see that the rate is actually about 1.5%. You have to read through on the right-hand side scale. So the the GST burden on the rich household is about 1.56%. Contrasting this with the low income group, which is a lot higher. And those in this segment, which is at the highest. So this shape, this GSTI line, the blue line, the shape is an important shape because if it is a progressive tax, then you will have a nice upward sloping line such that as you earn more, you pay more GST as a percent of your income. But now we do not have a nice straight line. The left-hand side of it, in between these two arrows, you actually have got progressive tax because it increases as income increases, but then it dips quite drastically. So this, for here, you can see that it is actually very regressive. And the group that is going to be hit most are those making about 2,500 ringgit per month. So this is the shape of the line. It's something important. I want you to sort of make a snapshot in your brain because we'll come back to it later. The second bit is, of course, single persons. They are spiking up on the left-hand side. This is a lot higher than the other types of, the other sizes of households, which is much lower, which is more or less flattish. And the young households. The young households pay a lot more GST as a percent of their income. But what is also worth noting in this graph is you look at the elderly, which is the rightmost column. They have almost the same income as the younger people, but the GST burden is actually less. So that's because most elderly people do not eat at restaurants. They probably cook their food at home, so the burden is actually less. So depending on your lifestyle, that actually influences your GST burden. Next is that non-Malaysians household actually pay quite high GST burden. But this is more likely to due to the low income that they actually earn. But across the Malaysian households, it is the Bumiputra-led households that are paying more. 2.98% of the income compared to the Chinese-led household, albeit they earn more, spend more, they are paying less GST as a percent of their income. Next is we've categorized across occupation. It is this group, the clerical, the fishermen, which is paying a higher burden. And you note that they're actually earning less money as well. And I see that most of you in this room is more likely to be professionals, so you are all more likely to be on the on the left-hand side. So we are actually having lower tax burden as compared to the fishermen. How about across different regions in Malaysia? In Peninsular Malaysia, you have 83% of the household, but you actually pay 87% of the bill. So per household in Malaysia is higher. One of the reasons why we wanted, the government put for why we want to have a GST is that it broadens the tax base. And indeed, the sources of GST revenue is quite broad. But what I want to highlight is just these two areas: transportation and expenses in restaurants and hotels. These are the top two areas, top two revenue sources for GST. Important to note, because we'll come to this point, because if you want to source revenue in a different manner, you might want to target the top two categories. Total GST from households, we estimate it as 7.5 billion ringgit. That's under perfect conditions. But it is, one important element is to simplify the tax administration of it. You do not want to burden small businesses with the tax administration. So the government has said, anyone who is having less than $500,000 ringgit sales of annual sales, then they need not register for GST. So meaning that consumers who spend money with these institutions not register for GST, the government will not be collecting GST from it. So there's an element not being collected. So if you take away this element, what we are left is about 7 billion ringgit. That's from households. But tax simplification is one issue. Another important issue is actually fraud. How much leakage is it to fraud? And it's a different number to different countries, and it's a difficult number to actually estimate. So with that, we think that GST from households is going to be less than 7 billion ringgit.